Hey friends, it's me, your girl, Kristen Janice, also known as KD, here with your day 26 of Black History Month. Again, I'm going to be honest, it's actually February 27th. We're going to work this out. Get all this together. By tomorrow, you're going to have 28. I promise you that. But today I'm coming to say first, thank you again for everybody who's stuck it with me this month, who's hung out, who has learned something new, who has commented, liked, shared. I appreciate you. Again, I'm going to keep the Black History facts coming. They may not be, they will not be daily. I know that moving forward, but they will still be frequent because Black history is all year long kind of thing. I'm Black 365, so we're going to be learning 365. We in it? So if you're in it, make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe, all that stuff, depending on what platform you are accessing this information from. We're going to keep it coming along with some other things that I enjoy discussing and talking about, which I'm very excited about. So we're going to get into today's person, which is another phenomenal, awesome, dynamic Black woman, Miss Ella Baker. Now, if you watched the video where I talked about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC, you heard Miss Ella Baker's name there. She was the person who invited students to come to Shaw University for the founding of SNCC. But let me tell you something. That ain't all Miss Ella did, okay? Miss Ella was absolutely a powerhouse in her time. She was born in 1903. She transitioned to be an ancestor in 1986. And she is hands down, by far, bar none, the backbone of the civil rights movement as a whole for a multitude of reasons. So let's get into it. She was, again, one of the most influential leaders in the civil rights movement, but she's an unsung hero that we often don't hear much about. I wonder why. While many leaders like MLK and Malcolm X were public faces of the movement, she was a strategic mastermind behind many of its most powerful organizations. Unlike traditional civil rights leaders, she believed in grassroots organizing over charismatic leadership. She helped to empower everyday people, that was her thing, especially young activists and women, to take charge of their own liberation. Her life's work in organizations like the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee changed the landscape of activism as a whole and inspired future generations of Black organizers. Her philosophy was strong people don't need strong leaders. Okay. So she was born in Norfolk, Virginia, but grew up in Littleton, North Carolina. She was in a tight-knit Black community that emphasized education, activism, and self-determination. She attended Shaw University and HBCU. We learned about HBCUs in the last video. And she graduated as valedictorian of her class in 1927. She, even in college, began to challenge racist rules and systems and protested against policies that restricted students' rights. Her early experiences absolutely helped to shape her belief that ordinary people like her, not just famous leaders, have the power to bring about change. Some of her key contributions to the civil rights movement, right? In the 1940s and 50s, she helped the NAACP build a lot of grassroots power. She joined the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People in 1940, and she quickly rose to the top to become its highest ranking woman in the organization. Instead of focusing on lawsuits and legal battles, which the NAACP did at that time, she believed that organizing local Black communities to demand their rights was the way to go. She traveled across the country setting up NAACP chapters and recruiting young activists like one Miss Rosa Parks to participate in local movements. She pushed the NAACP to focus more on economic justice and working class Black people, not just Black elite leaders. She proved that real change doesn't come from speeches alone, but it comes from organizing people in their community. Now, in 1957, she moves on to help Dr. King build the Southern Christian Leadership Conference after the Montgomery bus boycotts. She co-founded the organization with Dr. King and other ministers. She helped develop the SCLC's organizing strategy as a whole. She pushed for the group to involve everyday people. That was like an ongoing thing for her, not just pastors and religious leaders. And she also organized the 1958 Crusade for Citizenship, an early voting rights campaign aimed at increasing Black voter registration. Even though Dr. King was the public face of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Baker was the one who built the infrastructure behind the movement. Get it, Miss Ella. She was obviously a huge part of the founding of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee because that's where Ms. Baker had her biggest impact. She founded and mentored students by first inviting them to come to Shaw University to form their own organization. Again, this came out of the sit-in movement in Greensboro, North Carolina, where they were protesting against segregation at lunch counters. And she encouraged them again to form their own organization separate from the older male-dominated civil rights groups. And she helped SNCC become the most radical and youth-led wing of the civil rights movement. Without Baker, there would be no SNCC, which means there also would be no freedom rides and no Black Power movement, both significant movements in the advancement of Black people and Black culture. And one of the things that I think had the greatest impact that she did is she mentored many of the most influential civil rights leaders directly, like direct impact. So that includes Diane Nash, who we talked about a couple of days back, who was also a mastermind. So that had to be amazing for her to see another Black woman who was the strategist. I couldn't get that word out. Who was this elite strategist in helping bring all these things together. Diane Nash was directly mentored by Miss Ella Baker. You have Stokely Carmichael, who later became Kwame Ture, who was a Black Power movement leader, the Black Panther Party. John Lewis, who I said was my congressperson, who came out of SNCC as well, was directly mentored by Ms. Baker. Bob Moses, who was a voting rights organizer in Mississippi, also directly mentored by Ms. Baker. Again, she recruited Rosa Parks to participate in the NAACP, which was a part of what led to her being a plant for the Montgomery bus boycott movement. So she had significant impact, even though we often don't hear her name. Her overall thought was that movement should not depend on one leader, but that we have to constantly train new leaders at every level. And that's exactly what she invested her time, energy, and effort into. She also helped to develop the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, who we heard about when I talked about, her name just left my head, Fannie Lou Hamer. I'm sorry, her name had just left my brain. She played a crucial role in challenging the Democratic Party's racist policies by helping to organize the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party alongside Fannie Lou Hamer to challenge the all-white delegation at the 1964 Democratic National Convention. Fannie Lou Hamer, who was also trained by Baker, gave a very powerful speech exposing the voter suppression and the racist violence in Mississippi, which again called for national outrage. Though they were not seated at the Democratic National Convention as the official delegation from the state of Mississippi, their activism absolutely forced the Democratic Party to make changes internally, and it increased Black political representation within the party. And it helped Black Southerners gain political power, leading to the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Ella Baker was different for a lot of reasons. She believed in group-centered leadership. She did not believe in Messiah-type leaders like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. She really thought that movement should be led by the people, not just one charismatic leader. And she felt, honestly, that strong people really did not need strong leaders. Their individual strengths would come together and work together to support whatever the movements were that they were behind. She absolutely championed young people, which I adore and I believe in personally. She trusted young activists to lead the movement, while older leaders often dismissed them then and honestly still dismiss them now. She organized women, students, and grassroots organizers to take leadership roles. And her work with SNCC proved that youth movements can absolutely change history. She knew that economic justice equaled racial justice. She argued that civil rights was about more than integration. It was about economic empowerment. She pushed for Black workers' rights, fair wages, and economic self-sufficiency. She supported cooperative economics and community self-reliance. She was not about the games. Sis was about her business. She faced many challenges as a woman in the movement. She dealt with sexism and a lot of male civil rights leaders trying to trying to dismiss her contributions while benefiting from her organization. She often faced erasure from history because she wasn't public like a Dr. King. A lot of people don't know her name, even still to this day. And then her agreements in the end of the day with Dr. King, where she provided a lot of pushback on his top-down leadership style because she believed more in grassroots power, also pushed her a little bit more into obscurity from the public eye, but it did not stop her activism and her work. She kept organizing. She kept empowering. She literally never stopped fighting for justice. She literally fought for justice all the way through the civil rights movement and long after. She supported Black women's movements and economic justice efforts, and she died in 1986, but her teachings still inspire movements to this very day. Every major youth-led movement today, like Black Lives Matter, owes something to Miss Ella Baker's vision of decentralized, people-powered activism. What can we learn from her? There was so much there, right? This is going to be probably one of my longest videos, but she is absolutely worthy of the longest video. Grassroots organizing is the key to change. We have to make sure we are involved in local movements because change starts at the community level. If you don't like what's going on in education, if you don't like what's going on in politics, if you don't like what's going on in the police department, whatever the case may be, the key is to get involved at your local level so that you can begin to see the immediate changes and the impact of your work in your local community. And maybe one day you'll move to a national stage if that's what you're interested in. Leadership is not just about one person. It's about empowering other people. We need to build movements, not just follow leaders. And we need to make sure we're consistently training our children, our next generation of activists. Young people absolutely have the power to transform society. Even if you're not a young activist, I'm getting a little up there, y'all. I'm about to hit mid-40s. We don't have to push them to the back or tell them to wait their turn. Their turn is now. Their turn is absolutely right now, and we need to work alongside of each other and grow together in an effort to continue to push our movements forward. And if you're a young person, don't you dare wait for some older person to give you permission to lead. We know a lot of older people don't know how to go sit down. You don't have to wait for permission. Wait for opportunity. And when opportunity comes, you take it by the horns. Do you hear me? I don't care if the opportunity comes when you're 12 or if it comes when you're 22. Take it and lead the way. Final thought, Miss Ella Baker was an architect of the civil rights movement, truly. She was the woman who worked behind the scenes in most of the major organizations to make the movement what it was. She built SNCC, mentored young leaders, and fought for economic justice. She absolutely proved that everyday people, not just famous leaders, drive social change. She laid the blueprint for the modern grassroots activism that we still see to this day. Her lesson, making sure you organize, empower, and never wait for permission to demand justice. The time for justice is always now. Always now. She is quoted as saying, "Give light and people will find their way." Well, let's make sure we're finding our own way by looking for the light. And where necessary, let's make sure we're being light so other people can find their way. As always, and in all of this, make sure you do what you need to do to be more than okay because you deserve to be more than okay. And you absolutely do what you need to do to live a life you love because you deserve to live a life you love. But in that process of being more than okay and in living a life you love, let's make sure we develop strong communities, strong activism, and something to lead our children into and leave behind for them to lead. All right? I love you. Mwah.